In my last video, I talked about how it felt awesome to get and to have abilities, even if they aren't necessarily part of your spec's main purpose, and I also talked about how getting small, measurable perks for progressing, as well as getting new abilities for making progress, felt awesome and rewarding. In this video, I'd like to discuss a way that Blizzard could bring back those rewards while simultaneously balancing out the fact that they don't want to eat up too much space on our spell bars. Now, the devs very recently had a system in the game that gave players measurable rewards for progressing that reminded me a lot of the vanilla talent system. Our artifact weapons in Legion had a lot of passives that reminded me a lot of the passive talents we had in vanilla. And every time you leveled up your weapon, you could spend a skill point on one of those artifact traits. However, unlike vanilla talents, the need to balance one spec's traits against another spec's traits, or the need to consider how traits from two different specs could interact with each other, was non-existent. The developers knew that in the end every player would have every trait on their weapon, so the choices involved while leveling up your weapon were essentially which traits to grab first, not which traits not to grab and which traits to grab. And you can only equip one artifact weapon at a time, so one spec's traits won't interact in an overpowered or discordant way with another spec's traits. So the kind of balancing act that was necessary in Vanilla or Wrath of the Lich King was no longer necessary in Legion. The system I have in mind is kind of like the system from Legion. Originally, I'd envisioned this as a trinket with a UI kind of like the Azerite Armor UI or the Legion Artifact Weapon UI. At the moment, I'd prefer that a new equipment slot, different from the other equipment slots, be created to hold this item, and I'll call it a Relic slot. Again, you can tell I'm a Cataclysm junkie since I'm trying to bring that slot back too. Anyhow, I envisioned that Relic having a graph of Relic traits much like the traits on the Legion artifact weapons, but this Relic would also include some active abilities as well as the passives. However, in order to balance the need for players to get awesome and rewarding stuff against the need to keep in mind how much room we have in our spell bars, I have two different yet concurrent solutions. Solution number one: have a single slot on the relic for a new active ability. As the player unlocks more actives, these actives become options that the player can choose between having in that single slot, and the player can switch between these active ability options whenever they're out of combat. I'll explain why later. But at any given time, only one of those options will actually be on their spell bar. Solution number two: some of the active abilities are actually intended to replace existing abilities, but again, these replacement actives have their own slot separate from the new ability slot. Let me give some examples to illustrate. Let's say that a Holy Paladin gets their relics after a quest chain right at the start of the expansion, and as a reward for obtaining that relic, immediately the replacement ability that they're given is Holy Bolt, an ability that replaces Holy Light. Cast it on an ally, and it acts the same way Holy Light does, but probably with another small perk. Maybe a little more healing or a little less mana cost, something like that. But you can cast this same spell on an enemy to hurl a bolt of holy damage at them too, and given the new spellbook animation that Holy Paladins have, and the fact that we aim our hand in the direction of our target, I'd expect something like what I'm proposing to just look awesome. But again, let's say that as a Holy Paladin levels up or collects more relic power and goes up through the nodes in their relic, they find another replacement ability, Speed of Light. This is something that replaces Divine Steed and lasts a few seconds longer, and makes it look like Odin cast his speed buff on the Paladin. At this point, the Paladin has a choice. He can remove Holy Bolt from his spell bar and go back to Holy Light while upgrading Divine Steed to Speed of Light, or he can keep Holy Bolt and forego Speed of Light, at least for now. Only one replacement ability can be available at a time. Only one can be equipped in the replacement ability slot. Of course, as the expansion progresses and patches come out, or as the player levels up, they might end up unlocking a second replacement ability slot that'll let them choose between two abilities to replace at the same time, as that extra slot would be yet another way to reward players for making progress. Now, it's okay if an ability isn't that much more powerful or even that different from what it's replacing, objectively speaking. For another example of a replacement ability, imagine if assassination rogues were given an ability called Poison Nova to replace Fan of Knives as an option for what to have in the replacement ability slot. It would probably deal slightly more damage than Fan of Knives, deal it as nature damage instead of physical, and still apply poisons like Fan of Knives does today. It would also have a cool animation that would be different from what rogues already have. Now, objectively speaking, an ability like this wouldn't make much of a difference at all in gameplay. In the end, the only times when a fully leveled raiding assassin rogue would actually choose to have Poison Nova equipped would be while fighting trash or in AoE heavy boss fights. But it's okay for rewards like this to be situational, and it's okay for rewards to objectively be not very big. The thing that is truly important is that these abilities feel rewarding to get and give the player something to look forward to as they're making progress. The flavor the abilities add for the class, cool looking animations for the abilities, those are the things that would make these replacement abilities rewarding to get and worth pursuing while progressing. Now, about passives that would come from this system. I'd also recommend having slots for those passives, probably with about 3 slots for them, with just one available when you first get the relic and the other 2 unlocked as you make progress. Again, a player should have the ability to switch between which passives they have active and equipped at will anytime they're out of combat. Having the passives be, to some extent, mutually exclusive allows them to be more powerful, profound, and/or game-changing. For example, another Cataclysm talent Holy Paladins had, I keep going back to Cataclysm, is Protector of the Innocent, which heals the Paladin for a set amount every time the Paladin heals someone else. That would be perfect for a Light of the Martyr heavy playstyle. But maybe a Holy Paladin is into a different kind of playstyle and wants a different passive. He can switch out Protector of the Innocent for something else in that case. None of this really precludes having passives that apply no matter what you've got in what slot, mind you. Things like plus crit, plus haste, additional power for some of your abilities, any of those could be part of this relic progression, and not require anything equipped for them to help your character. The way I see it, there is a graduated scale from awesomeness that it's important to keep in mind when designing this whole thing. At the lowest tier we have practical. These are things like plus stats, plus power on particular abilities, or other passive perks that wouldn't affect your gameplay unless you were frantically asking your calculator whether it should. Sure, these types of practical passives can be powerful, but that doesn't automatically make them awesome. That said, more powerful ones should be deeper in the system. Must resist the urge to talk about pre-1.9 Blessing of Kings. I resisted it. Anyhow, you can have tons of these actives at once, with few or no player decisions revolving around them. These would be unslotted passives. At Tier 2 of this graduated scale of awesomeness, we'd have Nifty. These are passives that would positively affect your gameplay whether you had a calculator in your hand or not. They can involve pleasant surprises like the Illumination talent from Vanilla that restored mana when you critically healed someone, or they can be things that work together with your other abilities to enable you to do things that you couldn't do before, like Protector of the Innocent. These would have 3 slots, maybe 1 or 2 during the level up process, since having a player decision here would actually feel, well, nifty. At Tier 3 of this graduated scale of awesomeness is Cool. These are active abilities that have new animations or new flavor to them. They may not necessarily be that much more powerful or useful than what you already have, and or they might be situational at best, but you'll like having access to them better than not having access to them. One of the big things that makes them cool is that they're active. You decide when these new animations happen. There's instant gratification to clicking the button, and there are tools in your toolbox. These would have 1 slot to start with, maybe more than 1 as patches get released, maybe 2 at the end of the leveling process as a reward. These are the replacement abilities. And of course, at Tier 4, we have Awesome. These are brand new abilities that feel like, and maybe even are, complete game changers. They can be cooldowns or new strikes or spells that have effects you didn't have before. These would be new active abilities that don't replace anything that already exists, and they'd have 1 slot to give players a big decision to make. Maybe there'd be 2 slots for these mega actives at the end of the expansion as a reward for sticking with it, maybe not. This system's progression would probably entail both collecting relic power, much like Azerite or artifact power, and it would entail gaining experience levels. Both of these would need to be taken into account as part of the progression of the relic, and both would need to feed the player some rewards. Maybe relic power doesn't get unlocked until level 130, and until then an experience level gets you a single skill point that you can use to unlock a new node as you go. There's another gotcha here that I'd like to address. The way this is set up, it would be possible for a healer or a tank to have passives or actives equipped that are good for soloing, and then they go out and do world quests or something while waiting in the queue to get into a dungeon. When the UI pops up that says match found, enter dungeon, it would be for the best if they could immediately go to their Relic UI, click a button, and bam, all their Relic slots are redone for healing or tanking. The way things like Azerite traits are, players would need to go back to a city and pay a vendor to reset their traits. Being able to switch between these relic customization options on the fly would be a much better move, if it allows for the kind of customization that I'm talking about here. Speaking of relics, the reason I'm talking about adding a brand new equipment slot instead of using an existing equipment slot is this. When Blizzard used an existing equipment slot for this kind of thing in the past, it actually cut into the game's variety a bit. Getting the legendary cloak in Mists was fun, but once you obtained it, there was little if anything to be gained from getting a cloak drop off a boss or from crafting a cloak. Getting artifact weapons in Legion was awesome, but it also meant that blacksmiths and engineers couldn't craft weapons for the whole expansion. Though they did incorporate that into the plot for engineers, which was a good silver lining. Anyhow, today, the Heart of Azeroth amulet means that no jeweler can craft a necklace, and there are no necklaces dropping from bosses this expansion. Each equipment slot that we consume for something like this takes away from the expansion's variety. So if we have a completely new slot that is different from the existing ones, that won't hurt the game's variety a bit. I'd actually thought for a while that a trinket would be better, since one trinket slot taken by an artifact would still leave one trinket slot open, kind of like how Khadgar's ring left one ring slot open in Warlords. But with trinkets already being taken as a concept in patch 8.2, I figured having a brand new slot would be even better. Finally, I'd like to discuss what happens to the relic and to its slots in the expansion after the next expansion. I mean, let's say Blizzard took every single thing I said here and made a relic that worked exactly like this. When the next expansion is over, most of the things that are on that relic would disappear. Right? Well, I sure hope it's wrong. When that kind of thing happened after Legion, it was terrible. Nothing short of terrible for the game. All the passives that made our classes fun to play were gone, the classes were gutted with nothing to adequately fill in the gaps that those artifact weapons left behind. We would not want history to repeat itself, and neither would the developers. So, what to do with those slotted passives and replacement actives? What I would do, if I were showrunner at Blizzard, would be to merge the relic system with the talent system. When you stop and think about it, the relic system I'm talking about here sounds an awful lot like a talent system. And personally, I think a pretty good one, since it provides lots of opportunities for customization and a progression that the player can see and that rewards the players for progressing. Merging the relic and talent systems would keep those effects around and keep all of the awesomeness that I've thus far described intact. Obviously, they'd need to decide what to do with the talents that already exist in the talent grids. Do they create a new type of slot for them, or integrate them into the all-new ability slot? There's plenty of possibilities, but this concept, I think, will function as the best of both worlds for as many expansions as there are to come.